3 seconds. That's how long my grandson stood in the doorway before he said anything. 3 seconds where he just looked at me with those big brown eyes, and I knew something was wrong. His name is Eli. He's 8 years old. And he's the reason I didn't sleep 6 nights straight last February. I should back up. My son's name is Kevin. No, wait, I need to stop. I already caught myself. Let me start again the right way. My son. I'll call him my son because that's who he is to me, more than any name could say. He married his wife. I'll call her Trisha because that's close enough to what I called her in my head during all of this about 11 years ago. She was a paralegal when they met. Sharp, organized, the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday and always brought the right wine to dinner. I liked her. I want to be honest about that. For a long time, I genuinely liked her. Eli came along 8 years ago, 7 pounds 4 ounces, and I drove 4 hours from Raleigh to Charlotte the same night my son called me. I held that boy in the hospital room while the nurses did their checks, and I made him a quiet promise the way grandfathers do. You're going to be okay. I'm here. I've got you. I thought about that promise a lot last February. My wife passed 6 years ago. Breast cancer, 18 months from diagnosis to the end. After that, I retired from my job in logistics management and moved closer to my son's family. Not on top of them, I bought a place about 22 minutes away, depending on traffic on I-85. Close enough to be useful, far enough to have my own life. That was the balance we struck, and it worked for a long time. I watched Eli on Tuesday afternoons when Trisha had her spin class and my son worked late. Sometimes I'd pick him up from his school, Pineview Elementary, and we'd stop at Cookout on the way home because Eli loved their milkshakes and I loved watching him try to pick a flavor. He always took too long. He always ended up with banana, every single time. Last January, I noticed things were different. It started small, the way those things do. Eli seemed quieter than usual. Not sad exactly, just muted. Like someone had turned the volume down on him. He used to run to the door when I pulled up. Started taking a little longer. I figured it was a phase, maybe something happening at school. 8-year-old boys go through things. I didn't push. Then in early February, my son called and asked if I could take Eli for the weekend. He and Trisha were having some tension, he said. Nothing serious, he said. They just needed a couple of days to talk things through. I said, of course. I drove over Saturday morning. Eli was sitting on the front step when I got there. Not playing, not on his tablet, just sitting. His jacket was unzipped even though it was 40 degrees out. I asked him if he was cold and he shrugged. I zipped his jacket myself and loaded his bag in the truck. On the drive back to my house, he fell asleep before we even got to the highway. I thought he was just tired. Kids get tired. I turned the radio down and let him sleep. He slept for 3 hours when we got to my place. He woke up for dinner, ate about half his food, and was back asleep by 7:30. That was unusual. Eli was the kind of kid who had to be told 3 times to turn off the TV. He didn't just go to sleep. Sunday was more of the same. Slow, quiet, tired. He wanted to watch movies, which we did, but he kept nodding off in the middle of them. On Sunday evening, I was getting him a glass of water in the kitchen, and he padded in behind me in his socks. I turned around and he was just standing there. That's when he did it. He stood in the doorway for 3 seconds, looking at me with those eyes. Then he said, "Grandpa, is it normal to feel sleepy all the time?" I put the glass down on the counter. "What do you mean, all the time?" He pulled at the hem of his shirt. "Like even when I just woke up. I'm still sleepy? How long have you felt like that?" He thought about it, really thought about it, the way kids do when they're trying to be accurate. Since Thanksgiving, I think. Thanksgiving was almost 3 months before. I kept my voice even. I asked him a few more questions. Did he feel sick to his stomach? Sometimes. Did his head hurt a little in the mornings? Was he drinking enough water? He said he mostly drank the juice his mom put out for him. She always left a big cup of juice on the counter in the morning. He said he drank it because he was thirsty and it was there. I said, okay. I said, let's get you to bed. I said we'd talk more in the morning. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my kitchen until 2 in the morning with my coffee going cold in front of me. I'm not a doctor. I'm a 61-year-old retired logistics manager from Raleigh, North Carolina. I don't know everything, but I know my grandson. And I know that a child who has been tired since Thanksgiving, who wakes up already exhausted, who falls asleep on car rides and on the couch and during movies, that child is not just going through a phase. The juice kept coming back to me, the cup she left out every morning. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that Trisha was Eli's mother and she loved him, and this was probably nothing. I made myself say those things out loud in the quiet kitchen just to hear how they sounded. They didn't sound convincing. Monday morning, I called my son before Eli was up. I told him I wanted to take Eli to see a doctor before bringing him home. He asked why. I said I just wanted to be sure he was okay. I kept it vague. My son said okay, but I could hear the wariness in his voice, like he wasn't sure what I was implying. I took Eli to his pediatrician's office that morning. Okonkwo, a calm woman in her early 40s who had been Eli's doctor since he was a baby. I had to do some talking to get an appointment same day, but I told the receptionist it was important and she fit us in at 11. Eli sat on the paper-covered table and swung his feet while Dr. Okonkwo asked him questions. He answered her the same way he'd answered me, tired since around Thanksgiving, groggy in the mornings, better sometimes in the evenings. She checked his eyes, his reflexes, his glands. She didn't say much while she was examining him, which I'd learned over the years either meant nothing or meant something. Then she asked me to step outside with her for a moment while the nurse stayed with Eli. In the hallway, she kept her voice low. She said she wanted to run a tox screen. She said the pattern of symptoms, persistent drowsiness, morning grogginess, difficulty waking despite adequate sleep hours, was consistent with sedative exposure. She used careful words, clinical words, but I'd been a logistics manager. I understood subtext. I asked her to say it plainly. She looked at me steadily. I think there may be something in his system that shouldn't be there. I want to test his blood and urine before we say anything more. I nodded. I thanked her. I went back into the room and held Eli's hand while they drew his blood, and I looked at the ceiling and I thought about Thanksgiving, about 3 months of mornings, about a cup of juice left out on the counter. We didn't get results that day. Dr. Okonkwo said she'd rush it, but we were looking at 24 to 48 hours. She said she was required to make a report to Child Protective Services based on her clinical suspicion, and she was doing that today. I said I understood. I said Eli would be staying with me. She said that was probably best. I didn't call my son that night. I know some people will say that was wrong. Maybe it was. But I needed to think, and I needed to know what I was dealing with before I put something in front of him that I couldn't prove. My son loved Tricia. He'd built a life with her. If I walked in with suspicion and nothing else, she'd deny it. He'd be torn, and whoever was doing this would have time to cover their tracks. I needed the results first. Eli and I watched baseball highlights and ate grilled cheese sandwiches, and I pretended everything was fine. He was in bed by 8:30. I sat in my kitchen again, and this time I didn't even pretend to drink the coffee. The results came back Tuesday afternoon. Dr. Okonkwo called me directly. Diphenhydramine, elevated levels, consistent with regular ingestion over an extended period. Not a one-time thing, not accidental. The levels in his system pointed to something being given to him regularly, likely daily in liquid form. Diphenhydramine is the active ingredient in Benadryl. You can buy it at any drugstore. It makes you drowsy. In children, it hits harder and lasts longer than in adults. If you gave it to a child every morning in a cup of juice, that child would spend most of his day half asleep. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after she hung up. Then I called my son. He didn't believe me at first. Not fully. He said there had to be an explanation. He said maybe Eli had gotten into something. Maybe it was a mistake. I didn't argue with him. I told him to come to my house, and when he got there, I had the notes from the doctor's office and the printout of the tox screen results, and I laid them on the kitchen table, and I let him read. I watched my son's face while he read. I won't describe what happened in those minutes. Some things are private. What I'll say is that when he looked up, he wasn't the same person who'd walked through my door 20 minutes earlier. He asked me what we should do. I said, nothing yet. I said we needed more before we walked into any legal situation. He didn't like that. He wanted to confront her immediately. I understood that feeling because I'd felt it too, standing in that hospital hallway when Dr. Okonkwo used her careful clinical words and I translated them in real time. But confronting her meant warning her. Warning her meant evidence disappearing. I told my son to go home, act normal, don't say anything, give me a few days. He looked at me like I'd asked him to climb Everest. I said, Eli is safe here, that's the only thing that matters right now. Let me work. He went home. I don't know how he did it. I don't know how he sat across from her at dinner and didn't say a word, but he did. Meanwhile, I got to work. I'm not a detective. But I spent 31 years managing supply chains, which means I spent 31 years tracking things, documenting things, following paper trails. I knew how to be methodical. I knew how to build a case you could defend. I started with the pharmacy. There's a CVS about 6 minutes from my son's house. I went in and talked to the pharmacist, a young guy named, well, it doesn't matter what his name was. What matters is that I explained the situation and he told me he couldn't share purchase history with me directly, but that a physician or law enforcement could request it. I thanked him and called Dr. Okonkwo. Dr. Okonkwo had already filed her CPS report. She connected me with the investigator assigned to the case, a woman who was efficient and serious and who asked me very precise questions. I gave her everything I had. The tox screen, Eli's account of the morning juice, the dates, the timeline going back to Thanksgiving. The investigator moved faster than I expected. Within 48 hours, she had obtained pharmacy records from 3 stores within 10 miles of my son's house. Diphenhydramine, children's formula, purchased approximately every 3 to 4 weeks starting the previous October. 7 purchases total across 3 different locations, spread out so no single store would flag the pattern. 7 purchases. She'd been doing this since October. When I saw that report, I had to put it down and walk outside and stand on my front porch for a while. It was cold. I didn't notice. I thought about Eli at Thanksgiving dinner, how he'd seemed a little off, but I'd chalked it up to the noise and the crowd. I thought about Christmas, how he'd opened his presents slowly, like he was moving through water. I thought about every Tuesday afternoon I'd picked him up from school and noticed he seemed tired and thought maybe he was just growing. I had been looking right at it for months and I hadn't seen it. The CPS investigator moved to schedule a formal interview with Tricia. Before that happened, I sat down with an attorney, a family law attorney in Raleigh, who'd been recommended by a colleague of mine. I went through everything with her. She told me what I had was strong. The talk screen, the pharmacy records across multiple locations, the timeline, Eli's own account of the morning juice routine. She said if I brought this to a judge, I would be bringing it with everything in order. I asked about my son. She said he needed his own attorney and that he should file for emergency custody modification immediately given the circumstances. I called my son that night. I walked him through everything. This time he didn't push back. He found his own attorney by the next morning. What happened after that moved quickly, the way legal things sometimes do when the evidence is overwhelming and the judge is paying attention. Tricia was interviewed by CPS. She denied it, initially. Said Eli must have gotten into something accidentally. Said she couldn't explain the pharmacy records. Her attorney tried to suggest the records were coincidental, that diphenhydramine was common, that there were innocent explanations. The judge, and I'll give that man credit, he read the records carefully. 7 purchases, 3 locations, children's liquid formula, October through February, patterned intervals. He asked Tricia's attorney to explain the pattern. The attorney didn't have a good answer. My son was granted emergency temporary custody of Eli. Tricia was ordered to have no unsupervised contact. The criminal side of it moved on a separate track, and I want to be honest with you. As of when I'm telling you this story, that process was still ongoing. I won't tell you there was a clean ending with a courtroom scene and a sentence handed down, because that wouldn't be true. What I can tell you is that the DA's office took the case. What I can tell you is that the evidence was in their hands. What I can tell you for certain is that Eli is okay. It took about 6 weeks after he stopped drinking that juice every morning for him to fully come back to himself. Week 1, he was still slow, still groggy. Week 2, a little better. By week 3, he was starting to wake up on his own before his alarm. By week 5, he was the kid I remembered. The one who ran to the door, who couldn't pick a milkshake flavor, who talked too much about his Minecraft builds and not enough about his homework. He asked me once, about a month after everything happened, if his mom had meant to make him feel bad. He was sitting across from me at my kitchen table with a banana milkshake from Cookout, and he asked it so plainly the way kids ask hard things. I thought about what to say for a moment. I told him that sometimes adults make choices that are wrong, and the reasons behind those choices can be complicated, and that none of it had anything to do with anything he had done. I told him that what mattered was that he was safe now. I told him he had his dad and he had me and we weren't going anywhere. He went back to his milkshake. He seemed to think about that for a while. Then he said, "Grandpa, I want to get a dog." I laughed, the first real laugh I'd had in weeks. I told him we'd talk to his dad about it. People ask me sometimes if I wish I'd moved faster. If I wish I'd called the police that Sunday night when Eli stood in my doorway in his socks and told me he'd been tired since Thanksgiving. I understand why they ask. Part of me will always wonder. But I've thought about it enough to know this. If I had walked into my son's house that Sunday night, furious and certain, with nothing but a grandfather's suspicion, she would have denied it. The juice cup would have been empty and rinsed by morning, and whatever remained in Eli's system would have been explained away as him catching a cold. The window would have closed, and we might not have had what we needed to protect him. Staying calm when everything in you is screaming is not the same as doing nothing. Sometimes it's the only thing that works. Eli started 3rd grade in the fall. He wakes up every morning now, gets himself dressed, eats his breakfast, and complains that his dad packs too many carrot sticks in his lunch. He's on a baseball team. He's terrible at batting practice and doesn't seem to care at all. He runs to the truck when I pull up to his school on Tuesday afternoons. Last week he finally picked a different milkshake flavor. Strawberry. He didn't even seem to notice I noticed. I sat in that drive-thru and I watched him sip that strawberry milkshake and look out the window at the cars going by. And I thought about 3 seconds in a doorway. About a Sunday night in February. About a quiet promise I made to a 7-pound 4-ounce baby in a hospital room 8 years ago. "You're going to be okay. I'm here. I've got you." I kept it.